Hi, and welcome to my first YouTube how to do stumping video. We're going to give it a go. Uh, so I've been playing Flight Sim quite a bit lately, and I stream it on Twitch. So if anybody's interested in watching, please follow me on Twitch, Stone. And I decided to build myself a little dashboard, for lack of a better term. And that dashboard is just going to make things smoother and easier. I had a little one, and I was going to upgrade it to include screens and LCDs and LEDs. And as I'm doing my research online to figure out how to do some of this stuff, found a lot of people asking how to go multiple screens using the same screen and kind of cycling in between them. And I figured out a way to do it. I'm not sure if it's the best way to do it, but it works for me. And so we're going to give this a go and take you through what I've learned. So basically, every time we push a button, it cycles through the screen and changes what the screen's information is gonna give you, and also changes what my rotary knobs are going to control as well. So I can have one rotary knob to control the nav, the comm, and anything else. I might go farther than that. Right now, I've just got it doing those two: nav one, nav two, comm one, and comm two, with a combination of push buttons, and all using if statements. So the if statements I liked because they're very similar to Excel, and if not the same as Excel. And Excel is something that I had some experience with, so it worked out good for me. Again, there might be better ways to do it, programming, Lua, that kind of thing that I just don't know. So I've gone for quick and easy. So the first thing to do was to set up the button itself. So we did that in settings. We go to Mobiflight modules. We add our button. And this one here, I have called it the frequency change button. It's a simple button on a pin, and it's all set up and good to go. The next thing to do was to go to the inputs, and this is where things got interesting. So for the sake of making stuff easy for me to find, I've called this frequency navcom select push. Basically, that means anytime all the frequencies like navs and comms, I'm cycling like this. So now later when I have 18 gazillion outputs like here, I can hit description and order it and kind of find what I'm looking for. This is instead of grouping things in groups like you would in PaintShop Pro or Photoshop, one or the other. So what did I call it again? There you go. Frequency comm nav, that's just what I happen to call it. And the key to making this work was to change that input so that when I hit the button, it changed its number. And I've just used 2 for now. Let's break down that equation. So the very simplest if statement, simplest? I'm just making up words now, would be if that number is equal to 0, then we're going to turn it into a 1. If it's not equal to 0, which in this case would mean it's a 1, then we're going to make it into a 0. That's the simplest. And so now when I push the button, I'm going to see a 1. Actually, it'll probably start as a 0. So it's going to be a 0, and then I push the button, it turns into a 1. I push the button again, it turns into a 0. I push the button again, it turns into a 1. But I wanted more numbers than that. So I got rid of that last bit. And we added another if statement. So basically it's saying if it's 0, turn it into a 1. Okay, but it's not 0. So in this case, that would mean it was a 1. So then we add another if statement. So now we're saying if that number is equal to 1, then we're going to turn it into a 2. So now, if it's 0, we make it a 1. If it's not a 0, which in this case means it's a 1 or a 2, then it goes to this statement. It says, okay, it's not a 0. Well, then if it's a 1, we'll turn it into a 2. But if it's not a 1, so in this case, it's not a 0, and it's not a 1, that means it would have to be a 2. I'm just going to go back to 0. Right, I'm going to close that bracket off. And then because we have the bracket there, we have to put the other bracket behind it. And now it's all done. So now, again, I'm going to take a look at this, and it's going to say If it's a 0, turn it into the 1. If it's not a 0, then is it a 1? If it's a 1, we're going to make it a 2. If it's not a 1, so now it means it's not a 0 or a 1, then we're going to go back to 0. So now we're going to see 0 right off the bat. I push the button, it's going to turn itself into a 1. I push the button, it turns into a 2. I push the button, it turns back into a 0. And that would be the cycle. And that was exactly the cycle I was looking for. So I've set that button up as an input, and that button's going to move from 0 to 1. Now I'm going to set it up as an output. And I went to the outputs, and I called this one the LCD frequency navcom approach switch because of that third window as an approach. And oh, sorry, let me back up to the inputs. So for that button, there was no preset. So what I did is I set it up in its own offset. So I found on the internet that FSU IPC7 has these free offsets here that we can use for whatever we want. So this was the first one, 66C0, and it goes up from there. I can't remember how many there were, but there's a whole list of them. I only need like 4, so I was all good. And then I said this offset, here's what the value is going to be using that equation. So then we go back to display, or to output, and I wanted it to look to see what that value was, because we're going to use that value to determine what things are going to be. Again, this might not have been the best way to do it, but So again, instead of using a preset, we've said, look at the offset we've assigned, so 66C0, and figure out what that number is. Basically is all that does. Okay. And then once that's displayed, then I can use that config, I can use that number when I'm looking at other stuff. So if I go up to my, or down to my LCD nav, so this one was set up to display all my navigation points. So in terms of how to make it only show up with the button is we go to the precondition over here. And under the precondition, I said we're using a config item. The config item is going to be that nav approach switch, and that's the one that I have in the output section. And if the value of that is 0, then we're going to show the nav screen. And then for the COM screen, same thing. We just precondition had to be that the switch was 1. I have to change that. I'm back at nav. That's why. Here's the COM one right there. Hit the wrong button. Precondition is 1. And then for the other screen, it's the approach screen. And for the approach screen, I've just got it displaying things to make my approaches easier. So I've got it displaying actual vertical speed, altitude in feet above the ground, and then what my true airspeed is. But again, the precondition for that was if the switch equals 2. All right, so let's put this to the test. So I've started my FSU PC7. I've started Flight Sim. I've got the Mobiflights connected and all working, and I've hit run up here. So now, when I push this little button on my dashboard, I should see this number change. So right now it's 0. So because it's 0, my LCD nav 1 screen, I've called it, which has a precondition of 0, should be the one visible, and it is. No explanation point. Now when I hit this, it should turn to a 1 here. And it did. So now, because it turned to a 1, I now have this screen visible because I preconditioned this screen to have a 1. And then when I hit it again, it should turn to 2. And now that leaves me with my approach screen. And on my approach screen, I've just put some information to help me with my approaches, vertical speed, actual altitude, and airspeed, just to help for those butter landings. And again, it's showing up because I have that as a 2. And then the final test is it should go back to a 0 when I hit it again. Sweet. So using those if statements now, I've gone from one screen to another, to another, to another. All right, so what we had to do then again is we had to set the switch up in the settings. And if you're already using Mobiflight, you already know how to do that. So we set up the switch. And then in the input section, we assign it its own offset. So we want to find a free offset. And we assign the free offset to the switch. And the one again we used was, what was it again? 0 times 66. Oh, nope, that was a C. C0 is the one I used, but you don't have to. That was on the Mobiflight forum. And there's a link down there if you want to take a look, see at that. And then when we set the value for that, that's where we use our if statement. So again, it was if the value is equal to 0, then we're going to make it a 1. If it's not equal to 0, then we're going to say if that value is equal to 1, then we're going to make it a 2. And if not, we're going to make it a 0 again. Close that bracket, close that bracket. So now we have, as we push the button, it's going to cycle through 0, 1, 2, 0. Then we went to the output. And we basically looked at that statement. Right? So we have the output. Look at the offset that we printed out there. So looking at offset 66C0. And then for our screen or our switch or for whatever, so in my case, the screen, that's where we add the precondition based on the output of this. So the screen, before it decides to show itself, we'll look at the number that's being outputted here. And that number is being outputted based on this equation, which we have assigned to this offset. And we're going to use this switch to do that. So that's the way it works backwards. And that's the way it works forward. So I hope that was helpful. And if you have any other tips, that might not have been the best way to do it. It just worked for me. And I can keep adding if statements to that if I wanted to, and just keep adding numbers and numbers and numbers and numbers in my opinion. And then just keep using preconditions to determine how that's going to work. So I hope it was helpful. Again, if you're interested in flight simming, I stream on Twitch flight sims quite often, other games as well, but mostly flight sim. And also on my Discord page, we have some photos and updates of how this build is going. It's been a long, slow, arduous process, but we're getting there. And yeah, any helpful hints or questions that you might have on Discord, let me know. And hopefully we'll see you on Twitch. Stay safe and talk to you later.